On the streets of Shanghai, where the day bloomed in all its splendor and where the bustle and noise of city life increased by the minute. In a cafe, a girl with glasses and a beautiful dress was sitting at a table. She asked the boy if he had a car. An attractive young man placed his hands on the table and replied that he didn't have a car. The girl began to doubt the boy, crossed her arms and asked if he had real estate. He replied that he didn't have anything, so the girl looked at the boy and asked if he had anything. How could a guy go on blind dates? She got up and started to leave, then said the boy was a loser, that she was a senior employee and that the girl was wasting her time. The boy asked why she valued herself and her position in society so much. The girl turned and looked at him. The dark-haired girl got angry and asked what he had said. The boy behaved very confidently and calmly. The protagonist turned around and replied that the girl's luxurious bag was just a high-quality fake bought on eBay with free shipping. The makeup was also bad, only costing a few $dozen, and the girl was just a receptionist. How could she call herself a senior employee, or had the guy misunderstood something? The girl with glasses was very angry with the boy. The boy touched her face and said that the girl was still single, even though she was already 30 years old. No matter how much effort she put into her makeup, her flaws were still very obvious. The girl couldn't contain her emotions and started shouting at the protagonist and insulting him. This was heard by a passing waiter. After that, the girl left and the boy was left alone. He was sad about how it all ended. He began to look at his ring and take it off, remembering past moments in his life. The protagonist remembered how the protagonist's girlfriend returned the ring to him because that the boy always said that ring was a family heirloom, and so she suggested that they break up. The young man was unable to give his girlfriend the life she wanted. He squeezed the ring in his hand, then felt pain in his palm and thought he was a real loser. Cutting the hand with his own ring, the ring began to glow a bright red color and displayed an eye that looked at the protagonist. The boy was surprised and wondered why the ring began to glow when his blood fell on it. The family heirloom began to absorb his blood. The young man was frightened when he saw this. When the ring stopped shining, the protagonist felt tired and passed out on the table. After this, the protagonist wakes up and does not understand why he lost consciousness. He looked around and discovered that the ring was gone. The boy started looking for him, but couldn't find him. The protagonist asked the waiters if they saw his ring or if someone took it when he lost consciousness. They were scared and looked at the boy. The waiters started talking among themselves and came up with a plan to avoid problems. They caught the boy, paused and threw him out of the cafe. One of the waiters told him he should leave the place or he would call the police. The young man stood up and was shocked by this attitude towards him. He understood that the waiters simply didn't want to get into trouble, but he didn't even pay for the food. The boy was walking down the street, very upset about today. When he heard someone shouting in the street to attract people's attention, it was an advertisement about a national instant lottery. The protagonist stopped to watch. He wanted to try because they said if he was unlucky in relationships, he would be lucky in gambling. The protagonist approached a man who was selling lottery tickets and decided to buy one. On the lottery ticket, the boy saw inscriptions that were hidden. He didn't understand how this was possible. He didn't believe it. Then he started rubbing his eyes. The protagonist thought he hadn't slept enough and that it was his imagination. When the boy opened his eyes, he still saw which ticket was the winner. The protagonist was shocked by this ability. The young man thought he had received X-ray vision because of the ring and that with this power, he would become super rich. The seller waved his hand and said that if the boy didn't buy anything, he should get out of there. The boy smiled, took 3 lottery tickets and replied that he would buy them. The man looked at the boy and replied that he should just take one and leave. This wasn't a supermarket. The protagonist was a little angry with the salesman. The protagonist took the tickets and thought the man had terrible service. The boy should teach him a lesson. He shouted that he won $10,000 in the lottery. The people passing by noticed this. They started talking among themselves, thinking that he was very lucky and that it was a huge amount. They thought it was just washing powder. The man didn't believe the boy, looked at him and asked if he could check the note. The young man gave him the ticket, but the seller immediately tore it up and said it was fake. The boy shouted that he had just bought these tickets from him and he dared to deny it. How dare he? The seller replied that he watched the news and knew about these tricks. That the boy needed to get out of there. The protagonist said that he must provide proof if he claimed it was false. The man looked at the boy and said he was the main proof. The boy replied that if it was false, because he didn't tear it to pieces, but he put the note in his pocket, the seller was just lying to him. The stranger began to worry and said he would sue the boy for defamation if he continued to say that. The young man crossed his arms and said that, if the man spoke like that, he wouldn't blame the protagonist. He gave the seller $100 and said he would buy these tickets. The man didn't understand what the boy wanted to do. The boy approached the people and said that they should be his witnesses. He chose these tickets in front of everyone to give to them. If they won something, they could keep it. Strangers on the street dissuaded the boy. They wanted him to get his money back, as such money is earned through hard work. The protagonist replied that they should do what he said, that they needed to believe in the boy. The man wondered who the protagonist thought he was. The boy's behavior made him a little angry. People on the street took the boy's tickets and started scratching them. Afterwards they were happy because they had won a lot of money. The young man reached out his hand and told the man to pay everyone now. The man did not want to give money to the crowd of people. He was shocked that everyone won money in the lottery. The crowd was very displeased and began to complain, suspecting that the man was just deceiving them. The strangers approached the man and one of them grabbed the seller by the face. The man said he would give them money if they just let him go. People took the money from the seller. A stranger approached the protagonist and said that this was his ticket, that they would not allow the boy to be left with nothing because he made them rich. The protagonist took the note and thanked the people. The handsome man walked through the streets of the city, understanding that this was just the beginning. That with those eyes he would certainly achieve success in life. The protagonist started looking at the girls, really enjoying the skill he received, but his eyes started to hurt a lot. He closed them quickly, then decided to rest for a while. The boy started to having nosebleeds and couldn't use my eyes too much. One day passed, he was in front of the store and wanted to go in to start his work. Working in a jewelry store would be a very good choice for him. The boy was happy to work there. As soon as the store doors opened, someone told him to go to him quickly. The man was unhappy that the protagonist had arrived so late, as they had very little time. The boss gave the boy a suitcase and told him to go with him to the rough stone auction. He quietly told the young man that Miss Chow, the representative's daughter, would be there, so he should behave and keep his mouth shut. The young man smiled, feeling excitement inside. He thought this was his chance to prove himself. The dark-haired man asked if he could hear him or not. The protagonist replied that the boy thought he needed to remain silent. The man put his hands in his pockets and told him to stop. If the protagonist did something wrong, he would be fired immediately. The guy in the suit looked at his boss and thought he would show him what it was like to be a professional. They approached the National Rough Diamond Auction. The protagonist was surprised to see that building. The boss was surprised that the protagonist knew that place. He needed to control himself and not say anything stupid when he met Chow. The main thing was not to stare at her. The protagonist asked the boss who this girl was and why he thought the boy would stare at her. The next actions take place in the hall, where the protagonist was sitting with a cup of coffee, watching a person. A very pretty girl with hair. The white people were sitting in front of him, reading something. She was elegant. The young man approached her and apologized to Miss Chow and elder Shi for being late. Chow didn't understand what happened to that boy. He continued to look at her. She asked if he had never seen a woman before. The guy in the suit replied that he didn't want to be rude to her, but the girl didn't know how she was different from the others. Let her take that as a compliment. The girl stood up and asked who they were hiring for this job. They would fire that boy for wanting to flirt with her. The protagonist replied that he would take back his words. The girl was not beautiful at all, because she was ugly inside. Miss Chow pointed her finger at him and said he was rude to her and should be fired immediately. The boss wanted to calm her down. The young man replied that her bad character would make the girl age faster and she would soon become a faded old woman. The boss approached Ixo and asked why he was saying that he needed to not be rude to customers, because he would fire him. Yui looked at the man and replied that the boss shouldn't interfere, that it wasn't his turn to speak. He was shocked by the protagonist's words and asked how dare the man would deal with him after they were done. The man walked to the suitcase. Then he started to open it and asked if Yui had stolen something from the company. He was going to find out. When the man opened the suitcase, he was very scared. The protagonist broke a bowl of blue and white porcelain from the Yuan dynasty. Everyone was shocked. It was very never, they didn't understand how this could happen, that Yuan dynasty porcelain bowl was worth millions. The boss asked Yui if he could pay for it. Elder Shi stood up and said that this was the first legal blue and white porcelain, and it would be a real shame to break it. The boss replied that he warned the protagonist all the way there, but he still broke down. The man thinks the boy did this on purpose to release his anger. Xiao told them to call the police and let him go to jail if he couldn't pay for the bowl. Yui sat him down and didn't understand how this happened. He always held the briefcase in his hands, so the bowl couldn't break. Suddenly, the protagonist managed to activate his ability and saw a man sitting down doing something. His head started to hurt. The boy didn't understand if it was an illusion or if he really saw the man guilty of what was happening. He activated his ability again, his head started to hurt even more, but the protagonist wanted to find out who he was. The young man saw the past, how his boss accidentally dropped the bowl and broke it. The man was very scared. The boy wondered if his penetrating gaze could really see into the past. He understood that they wanted to frame him. The girl screamed to stop the boy as he was paralyzed by fear. The boss agreed to this. Yui said to wait, he was sure that this porcelain was just a fake. Xiao responded that the protagonist had no brain at all or was blind. Mr. Chi personally checked the bowl, she was worth at least 1,000,000 yuan. The man grabbed Ixu's tie and said that although he knew how much authority Mr. Chi had, he dared to doubt his professionalism. The protagonist replied that he was ready to bet his boss that cup was fake. The dark-haired man released Ixu and said he was ready to reason with him. If the poor porcelain was real, in addition to the compensation, the boy would have to kneel on the floor in front of everyone and apologize. The young man asked what would happen if he was right. The boss replied that if by some miracle the protagonist was right, he would kneel in front of him. Elder Chi began to examine the porcelain and says that covered something very suspicious in the briefcase. He picked up a piece of china and said there was something wrong with it, that bit was very suspicious. The girl and the man were shocked by this statement from Elder Chi. The old man continued, it seemed to him that someone had replaced her, that was not the china he had checked. Chao asked the man what happened to the porcelain bowl. She was lying in a warehouse in their store. The man began to get very worried and stuttered. He replied that he himself did not know what was wrong. He pointed the finger at the protagonist and said that boy was to blame for all this, that he changed everything, and the replied that the suitcase was under the man's control all the time. How could he change the cup? The boss had already disgraced himself enough. The protagonist told Lekia that only he had access to the briefcase. It seemed to him that it was the boss who made the substitution. The girl called the guards to arrest Lechu for his criminal activities. Security came quickly and said they would comply with this order, but the protagonist stopped them. That man needed to fulfill his agreement. Kneel before the young man. The man didn't want to do that. The guy looked at Chao and said that this was her manager, that he couldn't even keep his word, and that she also needed to send people to check the warehouse as there might be an original bowl there. The green-eyed girl picked up the phone and decided to follow the protagonist's advice. Elder Chi said that for a man to kneel was a shame, but a man must keep his word. Lecha lost the bet, so he must kneel before Icho. Leah listened to the words of the wise old man. He then knelt down and apologized for his actions. The old man asked the young man how he determined that the porcelain was fake. Not every expert could do it so quickly. Icho replied that he thought Mr. Chi understood better than him and that porcelain had been made recently. He realized this after seeing the cracks. The elder smiled. The old man was pleased to have found someone so intelligent, and the polite young man was about to start the meeting. They were about to leave, and Elder Chi had to deal with the porcelain problem. After the meeting, the girl ordered her guards to hand Lechiel over to the police for his slander and actions. The old man raised his hand and said that Chiel shouldn't rush, she shouldn't act hastily. Chi was interested in Yo, so he wanted the boy to come with them, he wanted to see his skill. The girl agreed with Mr. Chi and said that Leah should be taken under the supervision of her guards. After that, they went to the auction. The protagonist began to think that Mr. Chi is a very experienced master. Thanks to his experience, he identified a fake accurately. It's no wonder everyone respects him so much. The protagonist discovered that Elder Chi stopped to look at the stone. He didn't understand why he was looking at her like that. Yo approached the old man, looked at the stone and thought that even Mr. Chi had been in doubt for a long time, because they wanted to sell that stone for an inflated price. The young man activated his eyes and thought that this was his chance to help Elder Chi. When the protagonist looked at the stone, he saw a large, precious stone inside. Yo was delighted and shouted that it was a wonderful stone, he wanted to buy it. The old man waved his hand and replied that it was better to look for better material, which didn't cost so much. People started talking among themselves, thanking Elder Chi for the advice as they wanted to acquire it. Elder Chi heard the protagonist say that he was buying that stone for $10,000. The old man turned around and started to smile. Xiao said that Elder Chi carefully studied that stone. That it could be sold, but not at a high price, that he wanted to waste money. The protagonist replied that he recently won the lottery, so he wanted to try his luck with the stone. The guy was very lucky lately, perhaps this stone would make him incredibly rich. Elder Chi approached him and said he was great. That the boy understood stones well. The young man smiled and told Mr. Chi that he was just trying his luck. The seller interrupted the conversation and said that the price was exactly $10,000, let me get his check, he would help the protagonist cut the stone for free. The girl said she needed to check on Leah. Elder Chi replied that she shouldn't rush, he wanted to see what would come out of that stone. Chao crossed his arms and said that the boy would gain nothing from that stone, that it was a waste of money. The young man replied to the girl, and if the value of the material is paid for the stone itself, what will you do? The girl replied that if he gained anything from that stone, she would apologize for her words, but if Ixo suffered losses, the boy would apologize to her. The protagonist agreed to these conditions. The seller was about to start cutting the stone, but the young man waved his hand and stopped him. He didn't understand why the boy stopped him and said that if Ixo changed his mind about buying that stone, it was too late, he couldn't return the money. The protagonist replied that he hadn't changed his mind, that he shouldn't worry so much. Ixo took the marker in his hands, stood close to the stone and began to draw lines on the stone, showing the seller where to cut. The boy with purple hair began sawing the stone according to the protagonist's marks. The girl didn't think there was anything special about that stone, she believed in Elder Chi, but she was interested in seeing. When the stone was cut, people saw something blue inside. One of them thought that if he had known, he would have bought that stone. Elder Chi was shocked by what was found in the stone, he couldn't say a word. When the stone was cut from all sides, people didn't believe their eyes, they didn't know that this was possible. The protagonist took the stone in his hands. The old man said it was a piece of topaz, very rare. Elder Chi wondered how the boy knew there was something valuable inside the stone, but he managed to determine the exact locations where the valuable stones were located. From the crowd, a man shouted that he would buy it for $500,000. The second man said he would buy it for $800,000. The man shouted that he would buy that one stone for $2 million. The old man approached him and said he would buy the stone for $1.2 million and add money for the precision of the cut. The young man smiled and said that he would sell it to Elder Chi, but for the market price of 1 million yuan. After all, he was there thanks to the old man. You thought about it, the old man is very smart, he saw the talent in him and now he is trying to appease him, but the boy understood this, so he won't fall into his trap. She looked at the boy and thought he was great, that he didn't brag and was very honest, that he had a great future. The boy approached Chow and said that the price of that stone had increased hundreds of times more than its initial value. So it was time for her to apologize. The girl was embarrassed. He looked to the side and apologized to the protagonist. The protagonist replied that his excuse didn't please him very much, but he would accept it and let the girl understand that she shouldn't underestimate him, otherwise it would only get worse. The young man hugged the stone and thought that now his parents would live a rich and carefree life. This was observed by an unknown man who did not want to be seen by anyone. They went to another room to look at other stones. The old man wanted to test the boy's abilities. An elderly man asked him how he liked that stone. The boy replied that he didn't know, that it was too risky. Elder Chow pointed to another stone and asked how he liked that one, which had a green hue. The protagonist replied that it was just a thin layer of green and that the price was too high. She thought about it, and Chow was trying to get rid of him with known facts so as not to show her true experience. Suddenly, the cell phone rang. The protagonist decided to take it out of his pocket and see who was calling. Yu was informed that his grandfather was in the hospital. The boy was very scared and said he would go immediately. The protagonist said that he now needed to visit his grandfather. If Chow was worried about him, she could send bodyguards after him. Just as the girl was about to respond, Elder Chow stopped with a wave of his hand. The old man smiled and said that he didn't think the young man had anything to do with the recent porcelain bowl incident, so he would let him go. Elder Chow picked up the phone, called and told Fong to take his friend to the first hospital, which was very urgent. The young man smiled and thanked Mr. Chow for his help. And Chow ran and told the old man to buy stone number 264, which, although it was expensive, was worth the money. The girl looked at Mr. Chow and asked why he protected him so much. That boy was just lucky. The old man replied that, for the girl to remember, she needed to think more with her head and not let the first impression cloud her mind. That young man understood stones better than him. That's why Elder Chow respected him. They needed to buy the stone the protagonist recommended as quickly as possible, otherwise other people would buy it. A few minutes later, they bought a stone. Inside there was a gem called a horse's tooth. Elder Chow was surprised. He didn't earn much, but he was in profit. Even with such a complex stone, the boy managed to identify it as profitable. He looked at Chow and said that the protagonist had an incredible talent. What would she say now? Chow was embarrassed and replied that she had gone too far with her emotions, that she now knew how to behave. Chow closed his eyes and the only thing he could say was that if they could get that young man, they would have peace. The next actions take place near the hospital, where the protagonist had already been taken by car. The young man got out of the car and thanked the driver for giving him a ride to the hospital. When he was about to enter the hospital, the protagonist heard a very familiar voice behind him calling his name. Yul turned around and saw Yang Guheng's uncle, Yang Zhang's aunt, Fan's brother's wife. Fan and his cousin brother Evo told the guy that he came with a very expensive car. Zhang Fan said he rented a car. You rode a motorcycle before, why did he decide to do this? Yang Guh approached the protagonist and said that he has the right to tell the guy that they have no money in the family and he spends it on these things. If grandpa finds out about this, it will only get worse for him. Yang Guhan said that his brother has an income of 20,000 yuan and even he does not dare to rent luxury cars and works in a jewelry store and pretends to be rich, forgetting about his family. The young man looked at them and said that they should look at themselves first and not at others. The aunt replied that this was all for you, he only wanted the best for him. He ignored these words and went to the hospital. The boy approached his grandfather and held his hand. He was very worried about his health and wanted to save him. Yi Zhang said that in order to cure him, they needed a lot of money. Their family didn't have that kind of money. The protagonist's father said that the doctor said that in the initial stage it would take a lot of money and then it would be easier. Heng Yen said that his grandfather needed a heart transplant that cost more than 1 million yuan. Post-operative care also costs a lot of money and he also needs medicine. The man approached his brother and said that their father somehow created 4 of them and that they need to save him. Aunt Yuan and Uncle Yenning came over and said that they didn't have that much money either. Their families were very poor and thought that if their grandfather was cured, he would not live long. Uncle Yi Zhang still hasn't paid the mortgage. Their son has a lot of income, but the mortgage is very expensive. They also have no money. The protagonist's father said that this is their own father and they need to think about how to save him. They can't leave him to his own devices. The whole family began to blame the protagonist's father for his grandfather's illness. They sent money to Jing to take care of him. And the last time they went to his house, they saw that his father was cleaning the table alone. At this age, he did not need such loads. They thought their father was tired of his behavior and fell ill. The protagonist got angry and shouted at them to stop fighting. He didn't understand how they could be called people. Grandpa was dying and they were blaming each other. Uncle Yi Zhang asked how he talks to his elders, where is his education? And I have no right to blame them. He is affectionate in words, but in reality he only knows how to waste money. Yi Su told them to shut up, then approached his father and said he would cover the costs of the operation himself. He had the money. Everyone was very surprised that the boy had money for such an expensive operation. The cousin said that if he got that amount of money, he would get down on his knees and apologize. The blonde didn't believe the guy had it, so she thought he was lying. The protagonist replied that he said it himself. If he now proved that he had money, then his brother would have to keep his promise. Zhang Fan started to take out a portable cash register from his bag and said that he could check if the guy was not afraid of embarrassing himself. The young man took out his credit card and told him to take the terminal. Soon his dear brother would kneel in front of him. The boy applied the card to the machine and the amount on the card appeared. The girl was shocked by what she saw. The young man asked his brother if he would kneel in front of him. But the brother replied that he was older than the protagonist, he needed to stop acting like a child. The relatives were shocked by my words and the aunt began to get indignant that Ginha had raised her son badly. The father approached his son and asked if he earned this money alone or if the boy stole it. The protagonist replied that this was his money and with it they would cure his grandfather and save his life. Ginha turned to her relatives and asked whether they would contribute to the treatment or not. The uncle replied that he would like to help, but he had no money. And the man with the glasses certainly hadn't. I's father told his son that they would pay for the treatment, but they needed to hurry. The protagonist agreed with his father's words. Suddenly, a very attractive girl came in and apologized for interrupting. Evo recognized the girl and was enchanted by her. The boy asked why you were sweating and came to them. The girl didn't recognize the boy, so she looked at him and asked who he was. He replied that she was a noble person, it would be strange if she met him. The cousin introduced himself, he was from the Wang advertising agency and he and Mr. Chang were advertising for her company. Sui sighed, closed his eyes and replied that he remembered him now, the boy was from the Wang company. She looked at the people around and asked which one was me. Evo approached her and said that his brother did it again, this guy is always causing trouble for them, if she wants to punish him, they will support her. The girl ignored Evo's words and approached the protagonist, she greeted him and introduced herself, Su Qin was Mr. Chi's assistant. The protagonist asked the girl why Mr. Chi sent her to him. The girl replied that she knew Evo's grandfather was in the hospital, so he sent her to find out how they could help. Sui Qin added that he had already agreed with the hospital director that his grandfather would receive the best doctors and that their company would pay for the treatment. All the relatives looked at the conversation and were shocked. They didn't understand what was happening. Evo smiled and said that the girl should convey his gratitude to Mr. Chow, but they didn't need to cover the costs of grandfather's treatment, he had money. The girl agreed with the boy and told him to keep her business card, if he had problems, to call her, and she would help him with any questions. The young man was very happy to receive so much care, so he thanked the Succinua. The girl replied that he was a very valuable guest for them. Chi Ao wanted to come personally, but urgent matters arose in the company, so he sent her. Chi Ao wanted to invite them to dinner. The girl with red eyes replied that Chi would gladly accept. She decided to leave so as not to bother them anymore. The protagonist thought that Chi Ao's behavior changed a lot, no wonder he works as a director, he understood everything immediately. The boy admired his ability to show flexibility. The father asked his son what was that now. The boy replied that the Ung Fu company appreciated his skills, so their boss started trying to please him, and he arrived in their company car. Jin smiled and asked why he didn't say that before. His father was very proud of him. The man knew his son was the best. And he replied that his father always taught him that he needed to be more modest and brag less about his achievements. There are people who achieve minimal success and begin to tell everyone and everywhere, and even in front of their relatives. These people dare to brag. My brother and his wife were ashamed of their behavior. The aunt smiled and said it was all a misunderstanding. They were a family, so they should stay together. The boy shouted that his grandfather worked all his life. He even did all the household chores. Relatives, in order to free themselves from responsibility and not pay for treatment, are ready to slander their own relatives and let the grandfather die. Jung insulted her husband and told him to apologize to his brother. Hun Yen approached the young man. Peace and asked his brother for forgiveness, saying he behaved badly. The protagonist ignored his brother and said he would pay for the treatment in full, but his grandfather needed a good mood to recover. He had just one request for all his relatives, to visit his grandfather more often and talk to him. The following actions take place on the street. The protagonist walked around the city and thought he should learn more about his skills and make money with them, but even if the skills disappeared, he didn't need to panic. Then, the boy noticed something strange. He was surrounded by a gang of men, and one of them was carrying a bat, and he asked him who they were and what they wanted from him. An old man approached the Oligans and said that the protagonist forgot him so quickly. The young man looked at the seller and said he ruined his plans to steal the lottery and that the man wanted to get revenge on him for it. The seller replied that the boy was smart, but it was too late to ask for mercy. He had already decided to make him incapable. And it was attacked by Oligans from all sides. The boy was wondering what to do in this situation. He realized that there were many people there, so he would have to use his skill and spend a lot of energy. One of the men decided to hit the protagonist in the face, but the boy easily dodged the blow. And he looked to the side and saw that he could now hit the other man who was approaching him. He hit his attacker in the stomach with all his strength. The boy was shocked that with a strong blow to the stomach, the man fell unconscious to the ground, but that wasn't all. The Oligans grabbed their sticks and ran towards Issue. He stood up and assumed a fighting stance. A few minutes later, the protagonist defeated all the men who wanted to beat him and told them to get out of there. His piercing gaze can anticipate enemy attacks and his reflexes are enhanced. All the defeated men fled. A car stopped next to them and someone was watching all this. The man in the car said he didn't think that young man could fight like a master. The car driver asked his boss what they should do now and what the plan was. The chief replied that Elder Lo saw his skills at the ancient stone exhibition, recognized this young man's talent, and ordered them to attract him to work for them with all their might. The stranger asked how they could do this, since the boy didn't even go to work with Elder Shi. He replied that they should take him anyway. He decided to attack his vulnerable points. Then, the actions take place near a jewelry store. A young boy was in front of the store and wanted to enter. When he entered, someone started shouting at Yo. The man couldn't believe he had the courage to come here. It was a girl who asked why the boy didn't go to work yesterday. If he didn't explain himself, it would be over. The protagonist closed his eyes and said that yesterday he was at the stone auction with Mr. Shi. She didn't believe his words and replied that he had such a great imagination that someone like him couldn't even stand by Elder Shi's side. The boy said that Lisha was there too, if she didn't believe it, to ask him. The girl got angry and asked if he doesn't realize his position in society, at least he understands what he's saying. The girl grabbed the boy by his clothes and asked how he could behave like that, and Shi still dares to call Lia by name. She had the right to punish him because the girl is her boss. Yu turned around and looked very serious. He told the girl to stop and not look for trouble for herself. The boss was furious and said she was deducting 500 yuan from his salary for being absent yesterday. Now he had the gall to be openly rude to her, so she fired him from that day on. The boy no longer works at their company. The girl called security to kick him out. But the protagonist said he would leave alone, but she would regret it. The pink-haired girl replied that she regretted not kicking him out sooner, so he should get out of there soon. The young man started to leave, but suddenly someone called him on his cell phone. He answered and greeted Sway. The girl asked if he had arrived at the store yet. The boy left the jewelry store and replied that he was fired and was going to the hospital. Sway was surprised that Yu was fired. She decided to deal with this injustice and resolve everything. He just needed to wait a little. Zhang called her boss and she answered quickly. The girl wanted to know why he was calling her. Zhang began to shout himself soon and at least understood what he was doing. She needed to bring Issue back quickly no matter how she did it. If she failed, not only would she be in trouble, but he would be as well. The girl was surprised that he was talking about you. The man told her to quickly follow him. Soon ran out of the store and ran to you. She apologized to him. The boy noticed the girl and turned around. The young man worked in this company for 3 months. He suffered insults from Soon and Aleka every day and now she suddenly decided to apologize. She ran and bowed to him. Zhang apologized again. The boy should understand her, she was a girl. The protagonist replied that if he forgave her, it still wouldn't change anything. Her boyfriend, Zhou, was seen stealing company property and the police have already arrested him. The young man said that if he wasn't mistaken, Jian was also involved in this, so they would soon come after her too. The boss was shocked by the boy's words. She couldn't believe Aleka could do something like that. 2 cars approached and security guards got out of one them and approached the protagonist and the girl. The guards grabbed Jyn's hand and told her that they needed to investigate a case of interference in the company's affairs, and she had to go with them. Sway got out of the car with Xiao and apologized for this misunderstanding. The boy replied that it wasn't their fault, so they shouldn't apologize. Xiao said that Su Jin would be severely punished for his actions, and on behalf of the company, apologized for the moral damage caused to him, hoping for his mercy. Yu Yao replied that he didn't need so much politeness, he still hadn't thanked him for helping his grandfather. Bella smiled and said it was their duty. When they had time, they would visit their grandfather. The red-eyed girl said they had a request for the boy. Could he go to the warehouse and check something? The protagonist agreed. If he hadn't been officially fired yet, then he was considered their employee and had to comply with their request. The store employees were shocked to see that Yu Yao had such a high position in society and wondered why he kept it a secret for so long, but were happy that someone taught Su Jin a lesson. Then the actions take place in the warehouse. Yu Yao explained there that, after interrogating Leia, they began to suspect that some of the products in the warehouse had been replaced. The girls would be happy if the protagonist could organize a check. The boy agreed. They opened the suitcase and there was a green vase. The young man became interested and decided to check it out. When Yu Yao looked closer, a red light appeared. He was surprised and didn't know what it could be. And he heard a man carrying this vase. His clothes were from a long time ago. Suyu was watching at that moment and wanted to ask what he was doing, but Xiao stopped her. The young man pointed to the vase and said it was from the Shang dynasty. It was genuine. The protagonist picked up a white bowl, made of Song-era white porcelain, also genuine. The boy began to examine other antiques. An antique vase with a dragon design was also real, but the bowl with a lid was fake. It was at most 10 years old. He looked at a lot of antiques today, so he felt really bad. His head could not support such a load, and he fell to his knees due to the pain in his head. The girls ran up to him and asked him what happened. He needed to take a break and then check the rest. Now he understood the limitations of his ability. Xiao agreed with the protagonist's words and thanked him, saying that he had better go to the hospital to see his grandfather. The boy thanked him and decided to leave. When the young man left, Xiao told the red-eyed girl to check on him, to see how accurately he had determined everything. Sui replied that everything was correct. The boy never made a mistake. The green-eyed girl asked how this was possible. She and the expert spent a lot of time trying to establish the authenticity of the antiques. The red-eyed girl said it was something mystical, alone, in half an hour, without tools or internet, just with one look to understand everything. She felt restless. The girl in green clothes said that they should keep him in the company at all costs. The protagonist went to the hospital and saw the guards near the door. He thought it was Zhao's work. He opened the door and entered his grandfather's room. His father found him and said his friends had come to see him. The young man looked ahead and saw that a man with his driver was sitting next to his grandfather. The man greeted the boy and decided to introduce himself. His name was Qin Sha, assistant to the director of Fuan Company. Jin said that Fuan Company is Ung Fu Company's main competitor. How can they be friends? Yu shook hands with Qin Shao and asked how he could help them. The man congratulated the boy and said that Director Liu appreciated his abilities. Now he could move to a new level of life, becoming very rich. The boy said he didn't understand them very well. The man with short hair said that the director liked Xiao and wanted to offer him a good job. The protagonist closed his eyes, thanked him for the offer and replied that he would need to think about it. The short-haired man was dissatisfied with Yu's answer and asked how he dared to say that. The young man asked what traditions they had at the company, trying to attract him as if they were teaching a dog to use the litter box. The company employee got angry and told the boy to repeat that to his face, and the man would beat him so badly that he would crawl on his knees. Yu replied that they should get out of there before he had to expel them personally. The boy asked his father if his grandfather had been scheduled for surgery. Shen Cha said that the guy was very arrogant. He dared to look down on their boss in exchange for his kindness. The boy replied that it was the boss who despised him, otherwise he would not have sent such workers after him. The father approached his son and said that he was very temperamental. It was not possible to refuse like that. After all, their company was linked to the mafia. It would be better not to become enemies. The protagonist replied that the boy is not the same as before, and if he works at Fuan, he will offend Anu, and with a company like Fuan it is better not to cooperate. Jin agreed with his son, but now the man didn't know what bad things they could do. The young man feared that they would blackmail him by threatening his father or grandfather, and is guilty of responding to them in such a reckless and rude way. At that moment, on the street, a man with short hair asked Qin Cha what they should do next. He wanted to kidnap the boy, and if he refused to work for them, he would beat him. Qin Cha replied that he only thinks about fighting and killing. He doesn't know how to use his brain. The man smiled and said that he only knows how to hit and kill. He has no brains. That's why they are together. But what will they do with this boy? The red-eyed man said he would make Xiao crawl to them on his knees and ask to be hired. Then, the actions take place in the hospital, where the protagonist told his father that today he will take care of his grandfather and let Jin rest. Yu told his grandfather that he had arranged the treatment procedure, so he would be fully recovered. The old man smiled. He was very happy and proud that he was such a good boy. After that, the red-eyed man said that his grandfather was very happy and proud that he was such a good boy. After that, a little time passed. The protagonist was lying next to his grandfather. He decided to train his skills. He looked up and saw two men standing above him. This time, he felt that the feeling of fatigue had eased. He needed to increase the power of his gaze. The young man thought about it. Apparently he had trained his sharp gaze and he needed to try to increase his strength even more. When the protagonist did this, he immediately closed his eyes. His eyes became very painful and he screamed. Grandfather woke up and asked Ishi what happened. The boy replied that he accidentally hit his head. The protagonist thought that everything was because of the laser he saw during the day. The aura of antiquity intensifies the effect of your skill. Starting tomorrow, he will start checking as many antiques as possible. The boy closed his eyes. His life has practically not changed. He has received skills, but he is still forced to work. The next action takes place in a store, where a man said that the vase of 100 birds belonged to the Ming dynasty. The girl must compensate for the damage. Conditioned case. The girl replied that when he took the vase away, there were already cracks. With a light touch, a piece broke off. The man couldn't believe that the girl meant that they decided to set her up on purpose. And he entered the store. The girl replied that that was not what she meant, but if they judged fairly, they were wrong. The stranger said there was no justice there. The employee broke her vase. Now she must make up for it. The young man asked Xinlei what was happening. He wanted to know everything in detail. Xinlei replied to the protagonist that it was good that he came. these people simply took out a vase with cracks, she touched it and a piece fell out, the girl didn't use any force. The protagonist thought that if everything was as the girl described, then they wanted to deceive her. He told her not to panic, now he would check everything. The boy used his skill and asked the man if the vase belonged to something. One was and placed the documents on the table, saying that it was a certificate of authenticity for the antiques and that he should look, as the vase was definitely genuine. Suddenly, two unknown men approached them, and one of them asked who was so bold in that store as to doubt that the company had correctly identified the authenticity of the antiques. It was Master Lin and his assistant. The man said he had to help them. 2 days ago, he brought this Ming Dynasty vase for them to inspect, and today their employee broke it. The stranger said that they still doubted the authenticity of the vase. Lin asked him if he understood anything about it, and he told him that it was a forgery and that he should check the vase again because sometimes experts make mistakes. The men asked who that guy was to say that and that he wasn't even worth Master Lin's shoes, who allowed him to be so cheeky. The protagonist asked if he was checking the vase, let him take a closer look. Lin replied that this was impossible. He examined her carefully and she was definitely real. The young man wanted to argue with the man. Lin asked who he was to argue with him. And he replied that if Lin was afraid, he should have said it directly. If he didn't check the toilet again, he should leave. Master Lin was very angry at these words. He said the boy was insulting them all. How could he be such a sinner? But the man agreed and asked what they would bet. And they replied that it should only be painted on icons and placed in temples. The man agreed, but if Lin won, then the young man would have to kneel before him. The boy agreed and replied that he didn't even know why people like Lin like to make others kneel. The protagonist took out his phone and started calling. The man said let him call and prepare the money. The boy replied that he didn't know why people like Lin like to make others kneel. The protagonist took out his phone and started calling. The young man called Xiao and asked if she knew Lin. She replied that he was a first-class appraiser, the pillar of Entai's company, and that he was famous in their circles. And he replied that he was giving them a gift, that they should prepare a contract soon. He would work for them at UNG Fu and the salary should not be inflated, it should be average. The man didn't understand what was happening. He added that the rest wasn't very important, she just needed to organize the hiring operation. The men began to laugh. Master Lin said that he boasted even better than him and that his serious look was perfectly interpreted. Because I hadn't been nominated for an Oscar yet, Chinla took the papers in his hands and said that the authorities asked to print these papers for him. The boy replied that he would need them later. The men continued to laugh. Lin couldn't believe I hadn't given up yet. The young man was determined. He approached the vase to make the contract. He held the vase with his hand and then decided to play cock on the floor with all his strength to show everyone that it wasn't real. When the vase fell to the floor, it broke into small pieces. The protagonist began looking for the part he needed. Everyone in the store was shocked by the protagonist's action and Lin's heart hurts after what he saw. The unknown man shouted that the boy had gone completely crazy and now he would have to make up for everything twice as much. The protagonist took a piece of the vase and said to Lin to look at it and then tell if it was a real vase or a fake one. Lin approached the boy and took a piece of the vase. When he carefully examined the piece, saw the number 90. The man began to worry. He couldn't believe he had made a mistake. Lin couldn't say a word. A man approached Lin and said that he had checked this vase. It couldn't be fake. Lin apologized to Shen, but it was a fake and he didn't notice it. Shen shouted that the boy had faked it. The boy apologized to Shen, but it was a fake and he didn't notice. Shen shouted that this was impossible, that they were conspiring to deceive him. This vase is very old, either they would double compensate him or the man would call the police. The young man replied that even if he called the police, Lin Chong simply made a mistake while working, he would refund the inspection cost and that was it. But the men came with counterfeit goods and this is considered a crime and they are sent to prison for 5 years. They were shocked by Yo's words. The boy turned to Shen and told her to call the police. When the men heard this, they began to quickly run out of the store. Shen promised that they would meet again. The protagonist told Lin not to worry. that those two cowards wouldn't dare cause him trouble. Yo responded that they were co-workers and colleagues should help each other. Suddenly, Xiao and Sui entered the store together with security and an unknown man. Xiao approached Lin and welcomed him to the Ong Fu company. They were happy to have a new employee. The girl supported herself. Yo told Lin to quickly sign the contract, that they had money and pretty girls. Wasn't it wonderful? The girl believed that, so that he wouldn't worry about his previous job, they would send qualified lawyers to resolve everything there. The fine for terminating the contract would be paid by their company. Yo told Lin to quickly sign the contract, that they had money and pretty girls. Wasn't it wonderful? Sui was embarrassed by the words of the protagonist and the girl. The green-eyed girl was a little embarrassed. Sui looked at Yo and smiled. The green-eyed girl smiled, handed the contract to Sui and said that Lin would be the pillar of their company from that day on. Lin replied that there was no need to be so polite to him, because the real master there was Yo. He wanted to learn from him. The protagonist replied that he was not a particularly good teacher. Besides, he would soon leave and Lin would become the pillar of the company. So the boy gave some advice. Learn from Shi, the eldest was an incredible master of his craft. The blue-haired boy asked if they were completely stupid. How could Yo become the pillar of a company with such weak skills? Were they throwing money away by giving him a salary? The green-eyed girl turned to him and asked what the blue-eyed boy meant. Kun replied that the girl thought this guy deserved her attention. He was just a deceiver and they fell for his tricks. Shiho told the boy to temper his words. She saw Yo's skills and praised him, so the only fool there was K. The blue-eyed boy replied that she was very kind. An old woman had gone crazy. Obviously I was deceiving them. He pointed his finger at them and said that everyone was conspiring to deceive them. He couldn't have an X-ray in his eyes. Yo said that if whoever thought he was fooling everyone, then let him check it however he wanted. It wouldn't hurt the protagonist to improve his antique skills. He ordered the guards to bring his treasure from the car. Security brought the antiques. The blue-eyed boy told them to bring it slowly and not touch anything. The guy with blue hair asked the protagonist to tell him what that object was. The protagonist begins to analyze the man's treasure. After analyzing for a while, the protagonist smiles. After completing your analysis, the protagonist kicks the man's treasure. The blue-haired man is angry that he kicked his treasure and questions him if he even has money to pay. Our protagonist asks what he is talking about and claims that it was a replica of the late Qing dynasty. The man is shocked to hear this. The man questions him why he thought that way while our protagonist asks if he was right. The man is embarrassed and then says yes, he is right. The protagonist then says that he doesn't need to prove himself to him and just wanted to make that clear. He keeps telling him not to be reckless and says he doesn't know him well, that's why he thought he was a liar. He should feel ashamed of himself. The man then, a little scared, starts to look at him. The protagonist then tells the man to calm down and says that he liked the man's bronze treasure and asks how much he would like to sell it for. The man smugly says 500,000 for him. The boy, confidently, counters by saying it would be for 200,000. The man, annoyed, says that 200,000 is a rubbish amount and asks if the boy is joking with him. Our protagonist, in turn, responds by saying yes or no, friend. The man then says deal done and says that he honestly expected to receive 100,000 in his treasury and that was why it was a good deal, as he would get extra money. The young man then tells Kyle to send him 200,000 and he will pay her back later. Kyle then says that there is no problem and that young Master Kong would send the 200,000 to him. The protagonist then says please no and says he knows he's charming, that's why he wants to get the money the right way, thus leaving Kyle embarrassed. Later, in a car, some people are talking. A young man says he's sure he didn't see it wrong. A slightly older man tells Mr. Lu that the boy is a true master at valuing treasures, but that he is a bit arrogant and didn't give a damn about the offer to join them. This man, who is titled Mr. Lu, says he will see then. The man tells Mr. Lu not to worry and says that he has a plan that will make our protagonist kneel before them so that they accept him. In a closed establishment, The boy asks where Kinjive came from. She then responds by saying that she is from Binhai. The man, while checking the authenticity of the products, says that it is a coincidence that they are from the same place. The young girl is then surprised to see that he came from the same place as her. The boy then says that he came from Binhai spiritually. The young girl tries to cover it up by saying that she didn't find it funny. The young woman then apologizes for talking while he is evaluating the goods and says that this will affect the results. He then tells her not to worry and says that it won't affect him. The young girl then says that she is truly impressed by the protagonist's intelligence. The boy then says that she is also incredible and being a beautiful and charming assistant also has its merits. He also praises the fact that she can handle everything the Xiao witch does. The young girl responds by saying that he seems to be quite dissatisfied with Xiao, but that although she can be a little harsh at times, she is a woman with a good heart. The boy tells her to forget what he said and says he won't work for Hang Fu anyway. The young girl shows happiness after hearing what he said. The young girl shows happiness upon hearing what he said and asks if he is serious. She also apologizes on Miss Zhao's behalf if she did something wrong to him and asks him to be calmer towards her. She says Hang Fu is the best choice for him and her company. And also says that Xiao will treat him well. The woman embarrassedly asks him to please continue with the company as she would still like to work with him more. The young boy then asks if she wants to see him every day. He also asks if he can start picking her up after work so they can start hanging out every day, and that if she doesn't mind she can even leave with him. The woman then blushes and punches the man in the arm. After returning to Hang Fu base, we see the protagonist say that continued use of his X-ray vision has improved his ability. It's less painful than before. He then had a sledgehammer in his hand. He says he paid 200,000 for this and hopes it doesn't disappoint. That said, he brings the sledgehammer down with great speed. It's right at the bottom of the treasure. The treasure then breaks, revealing that there was a scroll inside it. The boy then crouches down to pick up the parchment and says it was worth it. On the scroll is written the celestial ability of the dragon Tian Longju. The protagonist then exclaims what this is. He then begins to read the parchment and says that it was written in the 13th year of Zhenzuan. The scroll goes on to say that if you practice vital energy you will strengthen your body, it will harmonize the yin-yang, dispel illnesses, and ward off evil. The scroll even goes on to say that you can be as powerful as you want with skills, distinct, and can become a unique and true master. The scroll ends by telling you to remember that this is about your destiny, not, you must force, and you must not be too greedy, you will regret it if you have gone too far. The protagonist, after finishing reading the scroll, says that being a true master is incredible. He goes on to say that he needs to master 3 types of discipline for some parts of the body, and these would be 3 disciplines for mind, heaven, earth, man, and the body. The protagonist realizes that there are no writings by Ren Ji Ju and Ban Ha Gao Gong, so he wonders if this book is incomplete. He says it's okay as it's just an antique and tries to absorb the scent of the parchment. Absorbing the aroma, he says this is much stronger than those antiques. He decides to leave it for later because he will have to take care of his grandfather today, since tomorrow he has surgery to do. No next day, no hospital. The protagonist's grandfather is being carried away on a stretcher. The young man then hears his name being called by someone behind him. He looks back and comes across Xiao and his assistant. She greets him, telling him not to worry, as she left everything prepared. She also says that the surgeon in charge is one of the best in the city, so it will be fine. The old man thanks the girl, saying that his grandson will pay her back. The protagonist then becomes uncomfortable, thinking that Xiao will probably take advantage of this. The girl tells you not to worry and says that the protagonist is her friend, so it's natural for her to help him. The old man is happy and says that, as they are friends, they should help each other in the future. Outside the operating room, the protagonist, alongside a group of people, waits for news. He also apologizes to Xiao and her assistant for making them late at work and says they can come back now. Xiao says he will return, but will leave his assistant with him to help him. Then, out of nowhere, a nurse comes out shouting the name of the protagonist's family and asks if they are. Or. The nurse then says it's him, or rather, everyone there is. and asks how it's going, the surgery. The nurse says that the patient has had a sudden hemorrhage and the doctor is trying to save him, but it looks really dangerous, so he asks him to prepare for the worst. The boy then gets excited, asking if he wasn't one of the best doctors in the city, and how it happened. The nurse responds by asking if he was referring to Director M. He didn't come because he had something else to do, so another surgeon took over his work, which is why she fears that only Director M can fix what happened. The assistant is surprised and says that Miss Shout talked to the president so that the Dr. M got this surgery. So how did this happen? The nurse, scared, says she doesn't know, as she is just an employee. The assistant calls Miss Xiao and says something is wrong. The doctor in charge comes out asking where Director M is and tells her to find him quickly as he is the only one who can fix this. The protagonist, completely changed, tells them to find Director M quickly, because if something happens to his grandfather, he will make them pay for it. Someone then asks if he is looking for Dr. M. They, scared, look back to where the voice came from. The people who were also waiting with the protagonist are confused. A man with red hair and a nice suit then approaches, along with two other men. The boy begs Dr. M to save his grandfather, saying he will pay anything, that's why. The red-haired man interrupts, apologizing and saying that he forgot to mention that Dr. M left the hospital and that he is now President Lu's personal doctor, treating only him. The protagonist, with a frightening look, asks if he is threatening him with his friend's life, grandmother. The red-haired man then says he knows what he needs to do, just sign the contract that he will ask Dr. M to correct his grandfather's situation. The assistant suddenly snatches the paper from his hand and starts reading, saying that it is a special position in the man's company, with a salary of 3,000 and a contract term of 10 years. The assistant then tells the protagonist that he cannot sign that, as it would be how to deprive your own life. The man gets nervous, cursing the assistant and telling her to stop talking nonsense. He ends by telling him to just sign or he'll never see his grandfather again. The protagonist, melancholy, says he will sign. But suddenly a man appears, apologizing, saying that it was negligence on the part of the hospital administration that made this happen. The assistant calls him President Zahn. President Zahn says that a qualified doctor requires empathy and tells Dr. M to treat himself before thinking about saving others. He also tells the two men behind him that they should save the patient and quickly. The red-haired man does not give up on his persuasion and tells the protagonist that now only Dr. M could save his grandfather with 100% certainty. The protagonist then reluctantly closes his eyes. Soon after, he turns to ask the doctor about his grandfather's hemorrhage. The doctor says that he had a hemorrhage in his chest and that they didn't know which of his blood vessels had ruptured. They did not have enough experience to find the location of the bleeding in a short time and it was too late to do a complete examination. The boy then questions, asking if he knew the exact location of the broken vessels, he could fix them. The doctor says yes, if he knew he could definitely fix it, but that there wasn't enough time for that. The protagonist, completely confident, says he will go with him and tells him to do anything he says and that he will also be responsible for anything that goes wrong. The attending doctors are shocked to hear this, but the protagonist insists, saying, who will take responsibility for anything that goes wrong. The director tells the doctor to go with him and do exactly what he says. They then go to the operating room. Inside, the young man is saying that he is about 2 centimeters shorter. The protagonist tells him to go back a little and says yes, it's right there. The doctor is impressed and asks how this is possible, calling it incredible. Outside, everyone is waiting anxiously. It is also revealed that those people waiting outside are relatives of the protagonist. The man with red hair tells the protagonist's father that his son is too young to understand what is happening there. So he won't take it personally, but he should be aware of it, otherwise, he would be blamed for his grandfather's death. He keeps saying rudely that when the time comes, he is afraid that there will be nothing left but regrets for the protagonist, leaving his father scared. The nurse leaves the room telling everyone to move, as she is carrying the stretcher. The father, very nervous, asks the doctor what happened. The doctor smiles and says that his bleeding has stopped and that his life is no longer at risk. The protagonist's father then starts crying, thanking the doctor for saving his life, of his father. The doctor says that it was thanks to the protagonist's incredible guidance and also says that, "I wouldn't have been able to fix that alone." The assistant is surprised and asks the boy if he knew anything about medicine. The red-haired boy then asks how this is possible. He turns around, asking Dr. M if he hadn't said that only he could solve it, that situation. The doctor, completely scared, says that he was in fact the only one who could solve the problem, that kind of situation, and asks who that kid is. One of the doctors tells President Z that the patient bled a lot, so he is still in poor condition and the transplant needs to be postponed. The president then agrees and says he wants to assign a doctor to provide care 24 hours a day, Grandfather's Day. All doctors then follow orders. The president turns back, asking for the protagonist and the assistant. He apologizes, saying he's really sorry for what happened today. The boy says it's not his fault, but rather those scoundrels who have no mercy, nor conscience. The man, nervous, says that he hasn't finished with him yet and that he will see him later. He goes on to say that sooner or later he will beg on his knees. Meanwhile, the protagonist quickly approaches him. He kicks the man hard, making him collapse to the floor. One of the men who was there curses the protagonist. The assistant asks how dare he hit his brother. The young man, furious, looks at them with contempt. The man lying on the ground then calls the protagonist a bastard and tells him to wait. The boy says he's waiting there and starts rubbing the sole of his sneakers in the guy's face, man, asking what he can do. The man's younger brother then raises his fist, telling the protagonist that he is a dead man. The young man, completely confident, holds the man's punch, who is shocked, as he was a well-trained fighter. But the protagonist, without caring, pulls the man's arm back and trips him, knocking him to the ground. The young man then begins to beat the two of them while they are lying on the ground. They say the boy will pay for this. The protagonist's father then comes up behind him and tells him to stop hitting men. The boy responds that he was just teaching them a lesson and tells them not to mess with him again. The men run away. Meanwhile, the protagonist's father says that he humiliated people associated with gangster, and so they may not leave him alone. The assistant says she didn't expect them to use such a nasty trick, but she tells them not to worry, because her company will no longer let them mess with the protagonist's family. The protagonist then asks the assistant if she can do him a favor, asking to the hospital to have the security camera videos deleted. After all, he hit those people, then this could cause problems. The assistant says he is very attentive and tells him not to worry, as she will take care of it. Meanwhile, the red-haired man remains in the hospital tending to his injuries. At the same time, someone asks who did this to him. He looks back and calls him Master Lu, saying that it was the protagonist who hit him. It also says that the contract fell through and that the protagonist will not work for their company. Master Lu then says that, if that's the case, he's going to do something much more unpleasant and asks the man to send someone to break the protagonist's leg. The man follows orders and says he already has someone in mind and will do it right now. Master Lu, before leaving, still says that if he fails again, no need to go back. The protagonist enters a restroom. There, he finds his father and asks him to come home to rest. Instead, he will stay in his place. His father thanks him and asks him to call him if something goes wrong with Grandpa. The protagonist then reassures him and asks him to rest. From the bag, he takes out that parchment and he says he's going to see what that celestial dragon ability is about. Immediately afterwards, he begins to meditate. Taking a deep breath, he begins to channel energy. The young man then says he begins to feel his core. Finishing your concentrated breathing. He exclaims that it was very refreshing and he feels brand new. As if he had slept for several hours straight and that. Indeed, it was a great treasure. Soon after, his cell phone starts ringing and he sees it was Chow. He answers and asks Chow what she wants. Chow, in turn, he says he wants to invite him to breakfast and asks if he has time. There, the young girl offers a contract to the protagonist for a salary of 5 million and additional dividends from the company and asks if he wants to join it. The boy thanks Chow for giving him so much value. but he's afraid he can't sign the contract. The girl, in turn, tells him to at least check the contract and then decide whether he wants to sign it or not. He says he knows she and her company are good for him, but he's afraid he can't really sign the contract, but tells her not to worry, as he won't go to any of the other companies either. She asks if he's not going to work anymore, but the boy says he has his own plan. The woman tries to warn him that because he messed with Lu Shuang, he would hunt the protagonist at one time or another and only her company could protect him. The boy then, smiling, asks if she is worried about him, but she says she's serious and asks if he has any idea what's going on. The young man tells her not to worry, as he has everything under control. The woman then says that it doesn't matter to her, as she has already finished talking. The protagonist then leaves the establishment. He suddenly receives a call from his friend Fan Tong and asks why he is calling. His friend, in turn, asks if he forgot what day it is. The protagonist asks if they should celebrate once again that their friend was rejected. The friend curses him and says that today is their second graduation birthday party and asks if he is going to go. The protagonist thanks his friend for reminding him and says that he had actually forgotten. The friend tells the boy to run before it's too late and says that Wang, his classmate, is treating everyone with arrogance and asks him to get there quickly so they can teach him a lesson. The protagonist then arrives and realizes that the place is quite big. He enters the place and starts looking for his friend. The friend suddenly appears from behind and asks what he has been doing these last few days, since he hasn't called him. The protagonist jokes that he was trying to stay away from dirty dogs like him. The friend starts hitting him on the head and says he's very mean. Meanwhile, someone calls them. They look to the side and see a man clinging to a woman. The man says it's been a long time since he's seen them and says they haven't changed at all. The friend calls him Wang Jin, while the protagonist says he doesn't need all this fuss, as he already broke up with her a long time ago. The friend apologizes to the protagonist, saying that he wouldn't have asked him to come if he had known about this, and says that it is very embarrassing, implying that the protagonist and the blue-haired woman had a relationship. Wang tells the protagonist that he already graduated 2 years ago and only earns 3,000 in salary, saying that he can barely make a living for himself, let alone her. He continues the insult, telling the protagonist to work harder and use his brain so as not to live like a pig. The friend says that Wang went too far and says that they are not equal, because Wang has a rich father who gives him everything. The man then raises his hand and says that they are condemned to be poor. Some people there, watching the discussion, say that Wang has his own company, with annual sales of tens of millions in profit. They also say that he is the heir of the family, so he has good genes, and that he is really a talented young man. The woman tells the protagonist that she wasted many good years with him, and that is the most regrettable thing she has ever done in her life. Wang tells her that it's never too late to fix things, and now that she's his wife, she will be satisfied with her reputation and wealth. Some people shout from afar at the protagonist to have manners with the man, because what he said was nothing more than the truth. Furthermore, the protagonist's low salary reduced the course's average salary. The protagonist's friend intervenes, saying that they have gone too far and that it is a rare opportunity for them to get together, and asks why they like to humiliate their colleagues. Wang then makes fun of the protagonist, saying that since they are colleagues, he will give him a special favor. The man says that his company is short of cleaners, and that the monthly salary is 3,500, asking if he has any interest. He then looks at the protagonist with a superior look, and everyone behind him starts laughing. The people in the back say that Wang is helping the poor and tell the protagonist to show his gratitude. The boy, in turn, tells his friend Phantom not to get mad at these bastards. Wang asks who he is calling a bastard, and says that he is a figure who receives 3,000 in salary. He also calls him the leader of the beggars. The protagonist turns around and says that in 3 months he will be much better than he was. The man hears this and makes an apathetic face. Soon after, he starts laughing a lot at the protagonist, asking what's wrong with him. He then turns back and asks the group of people if they heard what he said. People, laughing a lot, also start making fun of the protagonist, saying that in 3 months he will become the company's official cleaner. The young man is unfazed and says that, in 3 months, he will be begging for mercy. The man, staring, says he will pay to see and also states that, in 3 months, he will pay for a meal in that same place and asks the protagonist if he would dare to attend. The young man then says that it's a done deal and turns to leave. Ong suddenly notices a famous figure entering the door and calls him Elder Ki. The man then approaches the man, asking if he's there for dinner too. But he is stopped by security, who asks who he is. Ong then introduces himself, saying that his father had already done several deals with him. The Lord then greets him, saying it's a pleasure to meet him. Ong tells the Lord that they really appreciate Wang Fu's company's support of his business, but they never had the chance to thank him in person. The man, in turn, says that he doesn't need to worry about that and says that it would be great if he qualified the products more. He also says that he has other business to do and asks for permission. The people behind are very impressed that Wang knows someone like the company leader, Wang Fu. The man recognizes the protagonist from afar and wonders if that isn't his friend Yi Qiu, and calls him. The woman from before and the group of people are shocked to hear this. The protagonist says this is familiar to him and greets him in a relaxed manner. The man asks if he came there for a classmate reunion and says it's no wonder he left him behind first. The boy says that Yi Qiu is much more respectable than him and asks if he is free at any time for dinner, as he would like to ask for advice. The man says that he would definitely be free, but apologizes for having to leave now, as he still has business to do. The protagonist thanks him and says he will visit him someday. The friend comes up from behind and grabs him, asking if he was hiding his contacts this whole time and says that it's amazing that he knows someone like Yi Qiu. He keeps making fun of Wang, saying that those who tend to brag too much end up digging their own grave, unlike those who show their achievements to the whole world. Wang gets nervous when he hears this, but his wife just says, "So what? Are you rich now?" "No, you're just poor." The friend tells the protagonist that it's a good thing he broke up with her, or his son would have mental problems. The woman turns to retort, but Wang stops her, telling them they need to go upstairs. Everyone then begins to head towards the room where dinner will take place. The protagonist thanks his friend Fan Tong for his support, and he responds by saying not to worry, just leave it with him there and he will always help you. He ends by saying that the protagonist also did very well. Everyone then gathers at the dinner table. The blue-haired woman tells Wang to be careful, as those two could eat 5 or 6 times more than her. Wang, in turn, tells the girl to forget about it, as it was the first time those two were going to a high-end restaurant, so let them enjoy their first decent meal. A man says that Wang is actually very generous, and he then points the finger at the protagonist, saying that he should show his gratitude to Wang. The friend tells the man to show some respect to Lu Ku, as he could talk to Elder who prevents equality. The man says that perhaps Elder just appreciates the hard work in his company and starts to praise Wang, saying that he is an entrepreneur with his own property. The young man tells his friend to stop wasting energy and just enjoy the meal, and that he didn't need to be mad at them. The friend then curses, saying that they will never go to a colleague meeting again. The boy then tells his friend Fanton that he was wondering if the two of them could open their own company. The friend questions how they would open a company and asks the protagonist if he really wanted to have such a successful career. The protagonist says that, in fact, that wasn't why he wanted to open a company. The friend then says that he can say that if there is anything he can help with, he will help. The protagonist then smiles, appreciating his friend's help, and proposes that they open a business together. The friend says that the only type of help he can't give is with money and says that there's no way he can open a business because of that, but that he can only help with manual work. The boy then says that his friend just needs to support him, that as long as he does that he won't have to worry about money. The friend thanks him for the trust that the protagonist has in him and says that all he has to do is send him a message and he will get there flying. Although he has no money, he will spare no effort to support you. He also questions him about what kind of business they are going to start. The protagonist then says that they are going to open a jewelry company. The friend says that the jewelry market has already been conquered by 3 large companies and asks the young man if he has a chance of winning. The boy then, confidently, says that he has almost a 100% chance of winning. The friend smiles and supports him, saying that if he thinks he can win, then they will win. Suddenly, Wang asks the people if they would like to go have fun in the chess room. He also asks the protagonist if he wants to see it. The woman asks Wang why he is worrying about this and says that the protagonist doesn't have much money. Wang, in turn, says it's okay because he can lend Ekel some money and says he's afraid he won't have the courage to join them. People begin to mock the protagonist, saying that if he needs to pay back he will never be able to, while others tell Wang to just donate some money to him. The woman starts laughing and says that there is no difference between donating and lending, as the protagonist won't be able to pay anyway. The boy then, without being shaken, says that, in that case, he will accept the offer. Wang then gets excited and says that they are going to play something worth a lot of money and says that, if the protagonist doesn't have any money there, he can start by lending him some. The young man then tells him to forget that idea and says he has money and asks him what he wants to play and how much money he will bet. He then says that they will play blackjack and says that it will be worth 100 yuan per round. If the protagonist doesn't have enough money, the young man says that 100 yuan is not enough and that he will bet 500 per spin. Wang then gets up and says he's going to see what he's capable of. The man says he will start as a banker and the protagonist agrees. A beautiful woman then begins to shuffle the cards. And, soon after, he hands it over to both of them. The protagonist then cheers up and activates his X-ray vision ability to see his opponent's cards. He can then easily see which card Wang is holding. The woman then gives the command to know which of the two players will take a new card. The protagonist analyzes Wang's cards and says that he has 15 points in total. So you'll probably draw a card. He also starts looking at the woman's hand to see what card she will draw next. The young man then asks for another card, and the woman hands him a 3. The friend warns the protagonist that he already has 19 points, so he should stop. But the young man does not lose confidence and asks for another letter. The friend contextualizes it, saying that if the next card comes with more than 2 points, he will lose. The people behind Wang say that the protagonist deserves to be poor all his life. Wang says that no one will really be happy seeing this and calls the protagonist greedy. The woman then starts to pull another card. Throw the card on the table, revealing which one it was. The friend is surprised and says that they were hearts and now they have 20 points. Wang and the group of people are completely shocked to see that. Wang then, without accepting defeat, asks for another letter as well. The card that came to Wang was an 8, which totaled more than 21 points, so he lost. The two then celebrate the victory of the first round. Wang then says that he is very lucky and says that 500 yuan is not very exciting and asks if he would dare to bet more. The young man then asks how much he wants to bet. Wang then says 100,000 and asks if he will have the courage, yes or no. Back in the match, the protagonist begins to activate his X-ray vision ability. With a smile on his face, he tells him to go prepare the money. The man then tells him to show the cards. And the protagonist begins to show them, revealing that he had a perfect score of 21 points. The man begins to go into shock and ask how this is possible. Then he slams his hand on the table and says he wants to go one more time. The boy then starts to mock, telling him not to bet anymore or will it stay in debt. But the man tells him to shut up and asks if he's going to play or not. After that, the protagonist's victory is repeated a few more times. While the protagonist is winning, Wang starts to get desperate. Until someone in the group of people says that it's obvious he's cheating. The friend says that the protagonist sat in the chair the whole time and didn't touch the letters, so there's no way he could have stolen them. But the man says that the game dealer was cooperating with him, leaving the woman scared. The group of people in the back start to say that now it makes sense that the protagonist wins so many times in a row. The man goes on to say that EQ is an idiot for cheating so obviously. The game dealer tries to explain herself, saying she doesn't even know his name. About that, Wang knocks on the table and asks the young man how dare he cheat against him. Soon after, he points to the woman and asks if she knows who he is and says that wants to see the manager. The protagonist then calls him an idiot and says that he was the one who suggested the game of blackjack, so there was no way he could cheat. The man then starts to stutter and says he doesn't know how he did it. The man then points his finger at the protagonist and says that he is cheating anyway and asks the group of people behind him to beat the protagonist until he admits it. A white-haired girl says they shouldn't fight and asks them to calm down. He then curses the girl. The man then says he will split the 100,000 yuan for them to catch the protagonist. The men then begin to walk towards the protagonist, controlled by greed. The young man then says that this is shameful and he shouldn't try this trick to get rid of his debt or else he would suffer the consequences. One of the men then punches the protagonist and calls him weak. The boy then quickly slaps the man in the face, who in turn falls to the floor with pain in his face. Meanwhile, the protagonist asks who will be next. 3 men are in front of him and say they are going to catch him. The friend tells Yahello to run and says he will cover for him. But the young man thanks him and says there's no way he can lose to these losers. The protagonist then, with great speed and skill, knocks the men one by one to the ground, until only Wang was left. Yahello then says it's the man's turn and calls him to fight. But the completely scared man runs away and says that Yahello will pay for this. The friend then becomes completely fascinated by Yahello's strength and asks if he has been hiding his strength this entire time. The protagonist then sees the fallen men and says that he didn't expect them to become so corrupt in just 2 years and says that to be successful you shouldn't be guided by something like reputation. The protagonist then turns to the white-haired girl and says that he will transfer 100,000 wongs to her. He tells her to keep 50,000 and transfer the remaining 50,000 to those losers on the floor. The girl in turn says that she doesn't want his money, but that she will send the 50,000 to the fallen men. The young man then asks her to accept, as he may end up needing her help in the future and that if she needs help she can also contact him. They say goodbye to the white-haired girl and start to leave. When they are leaving, the friend asks Yahello if he had any crush on the white-haired girl since he gave her 50,000 wongs for free. The protagonist says that wasn't the reason and says that he might need her at some point in the future. The friend then says that the girl's mother was sick and asks if he gave 50,000 because he knew that. The protagonist says that yes, that's why he gave 50,000 wongs to the girl, but that he is disappointed in his remaining colleagues because they became trash in just 2 years. The friend jokes with him, telling him not to get upset and tells him to trust his father there. The protagonist jokes that they should follow Grandpa's lead and that if they do so they will be able to achieve something great. He then gets into a taxi and begins to say goodbye to his friend. After the taxi leaves we see Wang on a call saying that he is already out of place and says that he got into a taxi. The Wang then says that Qiu is doomed and says he will leave him crippled. During the taxi journey, a car passes at high speed, obstructing your path. The taxi driver then swears at the car and in. Then suddenly 2 motorbikes surround the taxi. The driver wonders if he is being attacked by gangster. The protagonist then asks him to stop the car and he says they're probably looking for him. The man then stops the taxi. Poise turns to the protagonist and asks who he is messing with. One of the men on the motorcycle arrives at the back of the car and knocks on the protagonist's window. He opens his window and asks what he wants. The man says that his boss wants to see the protagonist and says that if he doesn't come for good, he will do it for bad. The young man then says it's okay and he will follow him. Arriving there, he is surprised by the size of the mansion and says that if it were back in the day he would probably be scared to death. Before entering he asks the man to wait a minute. Soon after, he activates his X-ray vision ability. Then he suddenly smiles and tells him to take him to his boss. The man then tells his boss that he has arrived. The boss then takes a look back and comes across the protagonist. He suddenly says that the boy is confident since he is not afraid of him. The young man then asks the boss's name. The man with blonde hair then gets angry and calls the protagonist ignorant for not knowing the big tiger. The young man then says that he has heard of one of the 2 great auction house leaders and he calls him the 4th oldest in the law family and says he heard a lot about him.